Is it right for tech companies to tell you can't repair your own gadgets?
And what can go wrong when you reuse passwords online? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back once again to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News. Each week we sneak across the state borders to catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by the one and only Adam Turner. Adam, this week, look, I'm vaguely aware that there's this thing called the Olympics on. They shouldn't be on, there's a pandemic, but that's a story for another time. But as the regular listeners will know, sports is not entirely my thing, but there was a sports story that grabbed my attention. US scientists revealed they've developed a two-legged robot that can do a 5 kilometre run in under 53 minutes. Now, that's hardly Olympic speed, except maybe for that whole walking thing. But if you could hand over one Olympic sport to our incoming robot overlords, what would it be?
I think it'd have to be breakdancing. Is that an Olympic sport? Maybe it could be a demonstration sport for Brisbane.
Surely robots can already do the robot, though.
But that's the thing.
Isn't it inherent?
I'd watch that. I'd pay to watch that. That would rock. Either that or cheese rolling. One of those two.
Robot cheese rolling. Now,
robot cheese rolling.
Even I would tune in for robot cheese rolling. See, I was thinking here that the robot high dive would be excellent because you only ever get one shot at it and then the robot explodes.
You're not going to get much of a return crowd on that one, but yeah, great for television.
Not if they sit too close, no. We're also joined by Media-Wize's Anthony Caruana. Anthony, you're a man who loves a good jog, so with running robots in mind, how long do you reckon we've got before we're not actually going to be able to outrun them?
Well, that's a really good question. I went for a run this morning, as it happens, and I'm very happy to say that I can actually outrun Cassie at this point by about probably a fairly good margin. I could probably beat her over the 5Ks by about 25 or 30 minutes or something like that. But yeah, look, they keep getting faster and faster year on year, so I don't know that we'll be outrunning them much by the time, well, certainly by the time the Brisbane Olympics happen, the robots will be competing and we'll be watching. But when it comes to sports where the robots take over, I mean, Hugh Jackman and Evangeline Lilly gave us the inspiration when they did a feel-good boxing robot movie some years ago. So, I mean, that's where I'd go. Have to be boxing robots.
See, now you've got me thinking about whether or not you could do robot pro wrestling. That'd be something
you'd have
to see.
I mean, there's Robot Wars. We watch that. I've watched that frequently. So, I mean, we're there.
We are indeed there. And Anthony's joining us this week because, well, it's mea culpa time. We need to have a long, hard chat about online security, passwords, and where our lazy brains lead us to potentially disastrous shortcuts. But before we drop the curtain of password shame, there have been some significant movements overseas and here in Australia around what's usually called the right to repair. We caught up with Choice's Erin Turner to discuss where your rights lie and maybe where they should lie. So sometimes on this podcast, I've surrounded Adam with Kidmans by bringing Angus Kidman onto the show. But instead, I find myself in the unusual position of being surrounded by Turners. I've never been here before.
Yes. The New World Order.
Because we're joined by Erin Turner from Choice to talk about the issues around what's usually called right to repair. And Erin, a lot of people would presume if you bought a product, you've got the right to repair it. You can bounce it off a wall, you can hammer it with a nail, you can do what you like to it. But when we talk about right to repair, it's a lot more complex than that, isn't it?
It is. It's one of the more complex and as a result really interesting debates I've been part of because it covers everything from like really obscure intellectual property issues to just like how the consumer law works and do you actually own a product or are you renting it in some ways from some companies? Like what control do they still have once you've bought it?
So when we talk about tech products specifically, and we get into right to repair, there's a few kind of brands and product types that tend to come up an awful lot. Apple gets mentioned an awful lot, for example, especially around things like iPhone repairs. But recently, there's been a bit of movement here in Australia with the Productivity Commission looking at potential right to repair issues. What are they talking about maybe implementing?
So it's big and broad. We've just hit the
Hmm.
the draft report stage, and in about 6 months-ish, maybe a little less, we're going to get a final report and great recommendations that I hope make everyone's consumer rights much stronger. Well, at its core, a lot of what the Productivity Commission is talking about is making your consumer rights clearer and easier to use. Because we do technically have a right to repair in the law at the moment. If your product breaks within a time that is someone, an ordinary person would consider reasonable for it to continue, you have a right, depending on the fault, to get a repair, replacement, or refund. So our rights, in some ways, are much stronger than those, even in some European countries. But we know that when people go to use their rights, often a company will just be like, no, it's out of warranty. You can't do anything. Nothing for you.
But not just
Um,
that, they've done things to stop you repairing it. This is like with the copyright laws, it used to be you had the right to copy things, but they put encryption on it to stop you doing it. So you couldn't do it, even though technically you're allowed to. So it's like I said, they're going out of their way to deny people those rights, aren't they?
They are. And so one of the really interesting issues that's come up in this inquiry is do not open stickers, or if you remove this sticker, essentially your warranty is void.
Yeah.
Now that's an unfair contract term under the Australian consumer law almost universally, but companies still try it on.
Mm.
So there's this gap between what the law allows and what companies, particularly those big international companies, push. I think actually a lot of the right to repair debate is about big companies throwing their weight around.
You mean I could have been tearing those tags off my pillows all these years?
Big pillow, they're out to
Yeah.
stop you.
Now, one of the things that I found interesting, it's also big tractor, isn't it? It's not the
Oh
first thing
yeah.
that jumps to mind when you think about right to repair. What's the story there?
So this is interesting because it's I actually think it in a way it's got some similarities to Apple. It's a John Deere, a big
Hmm.
company with a lot of power, doing something unique that people really value. And there are a lot of agricultural groups that are getting really frustrated because they can't repair their giant specialist piece of machinery when it breaks. They've got to wait for an official repairer or someone to, unlock a tech lock or enter a special code to access it. So people who are often in really remote areas are waiting far too long to get basic fixes. It's just a company controlling their repair chain really aggressively.
And people are working their way around this because I saw one of the best lines I've seen for a while in a story. People are hacking their own John Deere tractors with torrented software. I don't think there's a word I don't love in that sentence.
Radical farmers
Yeah.
torrenting away. Yeah, look, it's about that control and ease piece. Because I mean, if you're thinking about people using this equipment, it's not like they're often in areas that are convenient for repair people to get to. I
Yeah.
really, I understand the frustrations behind that behavior.
On the Apple front, though, I mean, for a lot of people, there's probably one of those little, mid-mall, tiny phone repair places that will offer to do the repair, typically at a cost quite a bit cheaper than Apple. And the pricing is another part of the whole right to repair story, isn't it?
It is. So, like, there's really two repair issues that come up: individuals not being able to repair their own products, and people not being able to go to someone who is an expert to get a repair. And I think that's actually really important with tech because while there are some experts who can crack open a laptop, people like me are not in that category. I want to be able to go to an expert. Um, but some companies don't provide the technical information or even the spare parts to enable that secondary repair market, is what the Productivity Commission calls it. Um, and Apple in particular can be really restrictive in terms of who they work with to let repairs happen.
That reminds me of the fight that they had for a long time about whether you could get your car serviced under warranty and whether you had to go back to the original manufacturer's dealer like Holden or Ford or whatever, or if you could take it somewhere else. That dragged on for a long time, didn't it?
It did, and we got a really lovely result for that. So the Consumer Affairs Minister just passed an information requirement. So basically, car companies have to share information with independent repairers because most of a lot of car repairs these days require access through software or
Yeah.
special codes. So now they just have to provide the information, and hopefully we'll see a change there because there's big pricing gaps. If a company is controlling a repair and servicing market, they can really abuse customer trust and take advantage on price. It's great when there's competition at that level.
Wasn't it Apple's $150 battery suddenly became a $30 battery at one point when
It's
someone leaned on them and said this is not cool?
Exactly. Like if there's competition in the repair market, you're going to see cheaper prices, but also a different quality of service, particularly in time.
Mm.
We spoke to a lot of people about issues with laptop repair. There are some brands that are really restrictive around how you can get a repair. And Australians get really frustrated because you might have to send your product overseas for a repair. So you're waiting weeks
Yeah,
to
that's
get
crazy.
something back. It is, it's madness. When someone is likely has the skills near you, but maybe doesn't have the spare parts or the approvals they need to crack something open.
You mentioned the kind of the broadness of Australian consumer law, and it's definitely a strength. This whole idea that I think the typical line is something like, products should be fit for service for a reasonable period of time relative to their cost, or words to that effect. Um, but it's beyond that cost. It's a bit difficult at the moment to kind of work out. You can look at a device and go, well, I think that one might last this long, or it might last that long, or whatever. But you don't have a really good benchmark for this is a good one, this is not so good, but it might be cheaper. You might be happy with those trade-offs, but you just don't have that information. That's another thing that's been called for around this kind of right to repair idea, isn't it?
Yeah, this is something Choice is working really hard on because we see consistently like the strength of the consumer law is it's broad, but
Hmm.
then it's also its weakness. So if something breaks and you're like, oh, could it still apply under the consumer law? You've kind of got to make your argument and case, and it sometimes companies don't listen. So the Productivity Commission has said at minimum the ACCC should develop guidance about how long products should last. And we think that's great. I'd love to see some really official guidance, like a fridge should last X years. But we actually need more than that. You need information when you're buying something. So you know that, oh, this fridge is expected to last 10 years, this one will last 15. And that'll really sway you when you're thinking about, is it worth spending the extra few hundred on various products?
How do you judge that when it comes down to how they've skimped in the manufacturing process? Because we all know that things don't last as long as they used to. That's not just our imagination. It used to be that you would buy a fridge and it would last for 30 years. Um, and manufacturers deliberately make things to not last that long because they want you to buy a new one. So they could claim, oh, but we've built it and it only lasts 10 years. That's as long as it lasts. But they're cutting corners to make sure it only lasts 10 years.
So if you wanted to do it like really well, if you wanted to set up the best scheme possible, it'd have to be an independent scheme with testing. And this is
Yeah.
where Choice is like, all right, we know what we're doing here. We
Yeah.
can
All
test.
right. Stand back. Yeah.
Yeah, that's our nerdy time to shine.
Yeah.
There are actually some really good testing procedures that have been started to be developed by groups like Prompt over in the EU. And they look at a combination of things like just longevity tests, get two washing machines and run them for as long as they can. And that'll
Yeah.
tell you which one will last longer. And you can also do things like product teardowns. We've done occasional ones in our labs, and you do see differences. Like some products, they have components where you can easily take them apart and access parts to replace them, or they have parts that are using metal screws that you can take off. The worst products, everything's glued together, nothing
Yeah.
can be taken
Hmm.
apart. And
Yeah.
that really matters. You want to be able to make that distinction when you're in a store, but you can't crack the back of a washing machine and check it out.
You
But
can, but
they
you've
tend
avoided the
to, yeah,
warranty.
They would,
they tend
they'd
to get a
probably be a bit
bit
worried to have it
cranky
on.
if you do it in
Yeah.
store. And I mean, you get groups like iFixit, for example,
Yeah.
who do a lot of quite interesting work if you're interested even in just seeing what's inside these things. But they also do kind of repairability scores. That also kind of spins around to something that I think the EU, or at least France, I think, has guidelines on things like spare parts availability. Because it's not just how long is it going to last; it's when it goes, am I going to be able to get the widget I need to get it going again?
Yeah, and I actually think this is really important for a market like Australia, because you might be able to get something in the EU, but can you get it here, and how quickly
Hmm.
can you get it, at what cost? This matters. Well, so we've started to do some thinking about, if we would develop a labeling scheme, we've got really great big data sets about what points in a product are most likely to fail. So, for example, in fridges, it's most likely to be the fridge seal or the shelving. So those are the product components you want to know, is it going to be available in 5 or 10 years? Can I get it in Australia? Will you charge me for it? If you start to gather these information sets, you can actually start to rank and rate products based on that information.
How feasible is that though if they bring out a new model every couple of years that changes the design so it doesn't have the same shelves, for example, as the one before? Are they really going to keep making the old shelves for 10 years or make 10 years worth of the old shelves?
So I think it depends, and I'd love to see companies start to compete on this. I think
Mm,
I'd love to see companies start making promises on this that they then have to deliver to. So if the ideal situation is when you buy a fridge, you should know if the spare parts will be available in 10 years or not. It should be a factor that you're able to control, and ideally, companies would start competing on it. you kind of see companies competing on reliability a little bit in the warranty space. They'll say this
Yeah.
warranty will last for this year and that year. We need to take it down a level so they can start competing on things that will really, well, the rubber hits the road, in 10 years down the track with a fridge.
Well, I wanted to get onto warranties because this is one of those other areas where I think people get really kind of confused, that line between the warranty, the extended warranty, where Australian consumer law does or doesn't apply. I mean, personally, I don't tend to buy extended warranties because I'm the
Good.
argumentative type.
But they
I will
get you at
just
the
go back to them
counter.
and say, hey, Australian consumer law says this
But they
until they
spring
agree
it
with
on
me.
you at the checkout and you panic and you go, and next thing you know, you've got something on the cheap, but then paid way too much for an extended warranty. As you're walking out the door thinking, oh, damn, but it's too late.
So my partner always rolls his eyes, and anytime someone offers me an
Yeah.
extended warranty, I ask, "What does it offer me beyond the consumer law?" And then the poor salesperson looks very confused. But it's
Your
the
partner
question you
goes
need
to buy a
answered.
coffee, says, I'll be back in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, I'd like to look at the terms and conditions, please. Let me
Yeah.
review them. This is the downside of working at Choice.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious. Have you seen, and this is kind of a question without notice, I suppose, but have you seen too many extended warranties that actually do go above and beyond what Australian consumer law should cover anyway?
Yes, and you know what? There are really good examples where extended warranties add value, but they're tiny. There are a few examples. The best one I've seen is actually for lounges. So one of someone I know in the consumer movement bought a lounge, paid for an extended warranty because it covered red wine spills. The consumer law
Oh,
will never cover you for this.
wow. I want that across the board.
Exactly. Will something cover me for spilling gin on my stuff?
Yes.
I would pay for that.
Yeah.
But if it comes to like just the product has broken through regular use or wear and tear, the extended warranty is very rarely giving you extra value above the consumer law.
Can there come a point where they say, you've got this repaired too many times under warranty, so we're just going to give you your money back because we don't want to keep honoring the warranty?
It shouldn't. And actually, this is a really relevant thing for people who have issues with cars.
Yeah.
Um, so the difference is the difference between a minor and a major repair. If it's minor, so it's a small fault, um, the company can choose, do you get a repair or something else? If it's major, it should be your choice. But quite often, what we've seen in the car market, if people have lots of small things go wrong to the point where it's basically a lemon car, it's such a high value purchase that a lot of manufacturers are just saying, no, we'll keep repairing it. We don't want to give you your money back.
Yeah.
So, this dynamic exists. We don't want to make it hard for people to get a refund or a replacement. That's sometimes the right option. But you shouldn't have those limitations placed. If it's a crappy product, they should fix it.
I actually had the opposite experience with a VCR that I bought from a major consumer electronics chain who shall go unnamed. And I got conned and I bought the extended warranty, and which extended it to 3 or 4 years, whatever. And it had to go back 2 or 3 times because one of the RCA ports busted and something else busted. And then I took it back to like for the third time to get it repaired. And then they rang me up and said, we've decided, no, we're not going to repair it. We're just going to give you your money back because you brought this back too many times. And then they rang me up the next day and said, it's fixed. Come and get it. So I did.
Oh,
And then they rang me up the day after. Actually, no, that's no, I got it the wrong way around. They rang me up and said it's fixed, come and get it. And then they rang me up the day after and said, no, we're not going to fix it anymore. Give it back to us and we'll give you your money back. And I'm like, but you've already fixed it. And they're like, well, no, we don't want to do that. Give it back to us. And I'm like, well, it's at my house. So unless you're going to come around and break in and take it from me, you're not getting it back. But yeah, they had reached this threshold where, no, we're not honoring the warranty. Just have your money back and go away.
wow, that is
Yeah. And it would
very
have cost me
strange.
more because I got it cheap. It would have cost me a lot more to buy a replacement. So there was no way I was giving it up.
I honestly thought that story was going to end with you keeping the thing and them giving you the money back, which is one of those weird things that sometimes big companies
It
do.
does
But
happen, yeah.
I suppose this also leads into one of those definitional things where if we start to get this right to repair um, more enshrined in Australian law, more defined, does that open up the possibility for it then reducing or making it harder for consumers to seek those other forms of redress, especially refunds? If they're just going to say, oh, well, no, we'll just keep repairing it. Sure, it keeps catching fire, but you can deal with that as and when it happens.
This is actually something that we were really focused on in our early submission because repair is important and a lot of people want to be able to do it and have more control. But you don't want that situation like we saw in the car market where companies use repair as a delay to getting you an actual remedy that you need. Like if something's genuinely junk, take it back. It doesn't do what it's meant to do. Give me my money back. Our broad sense is that the consumer law in principle is fantastic. It's really about enforcement and ability to use it when it comes to, that point when something's gone wrong. We can do a lot more with right to repair by giving people great information at the point of sale, though. I think that's going to lead to more people buying really good products.
How should that look? Because I mean, at the moment, people are quite used to kind of things like Energy Stars, for example, or water efficiency, or so on. Are we going to end up with a laptop that, instead of just having like a brand sticker on the back, has like 57 different little gauges of what it can do or where
Ratings
it's
and
going to?
bits.
Yeah,
It gets 3 screwdrivers out of 5.
because look, I'll look at each and every one of those. I'll annoy the heck out of a salesperson, but I know my mother going in is just going to look at that and
She
go,
just wants one number.
"I don't
Yeah.
understand this at all."
So there's one country that started to do these rating systems, like a repairability and durability rating in France, and it kind of it is a lot. There's like 5 different scoring components. It does look like you're getting 3 screwdrivers out of 5. It's an excellent start, but I think if we're thinking about something that's usable for people, you want a lot of detail behind it, but you want something that looks like the energy or the water rating system. So you can just literally, 2 fridges, that one does better than that one. Maybe you want to add a little bit of extra information around how long does the company say that this will last? Because I think that claim matters. There's something about repairability and durability as a score. And then how long does the company say this is going to live in your house for?
There's also this question of, and Adam brought this up a little bit earlier, about stuff not being built to last as long. And there's some really classic tech products in this category, most notably printers. And we've talked about printers on the show actually not that long ago, in terms of the whole, you buy it and the ink that's in it is worth more than the printer
Everybody's
itself.
got a printer horror story.
This is an issue within right to repair as well, isn't it? When something's not worth repairing because it's been built so cheap and
Yeah, and like printer companies have a deliberate strategy around this. This is the thing that really gets me. Like they've built these products to fail, and they've structured the printer ink market to be ridiculous. We've done comparisons and found that gold is worth less than printer ink when gram by gram, which is absurd. Um, what we found when we looked at the issues of, choice members who had issues with printers, is that actually a lot of people who wanted to get them repaired, when they called up the companies, they just said, no way, go down to, insert store here and buy another one for $30 or $50. They're not engaging in any concept of repair. There's something about stewardship and accountability that I think we need to push on companies like this that are they're making trash and they know that they're doing it.
and there's a big environmental impact there too, surely.
Huge. And particularly when you think that it's not just about the big printer itself, it's also about the proprietary components. There was a really interesting legal case around, it turned out it landed on the side of good, but someone was refurbishing those printer inks. So, you could buy them slightly cheaper and refilled. And it was, secondary market, really interesting. And the brand behind it tried to step in and legally quash that using an intellectual property argument. And the fact that they even thought they could do that stopped someone reusing components to, serve customers and deliver an environmentally friendly outcome, that tells you what these printer companies are trying to do.
One of the other arguments I've seen there, though, is, and we're veering back towards Apple actually in a way, is the security side of things.
Yeah.
So they'll argue, for example, and I think there's some merit here. To be fair, they will argue that they don't want, the dude in the middle of the shopping mall changing the Touch ID sensor on your iPhone, because it could open up a security flaw. And these days, your iPhone obviously can be your credit card and so many other data services there. So that's why they want to be the sole proprietor of that, avenue of parts.
Yeah, that argument's come up, as well as one around, secondary markets. There's no controls on quality. But when we look at our data around repair, and we've got information from consumers who've used formal, like the Apple style repair shops, as well as the informal, there doesn't seem to be a trend. Bad issues happen in all of those cases. And, I think a security threat is just as likely from an underpaid Apple store employee as it is from the guy in the middle of the mall. It's it is an issue, but it's not insurmountable. I worry that sometimes these large companies try to present these issues as a way to stop competition entering that secondary repair market.
Awesome. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with the Productivity Commission and where we go with right to repair in Australia, whether we catch up to the rest of the world. Thanks so much for your time, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
And now, as is traditional, you get to face the vertical hold 3 questions of doom. But don't worry too much. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the contentious question, what's the best TV sitcom of all time?
Oh gosh, I've got to work my way up to that last one. All right,
Everyone does.
choice.com. Oh, choice.com.au. And if you enter right to repair and search, we've got a heap of information about the products that last, the products that don't. I'm Erin L. Turner on Twitter, and it's got to be a Star Trek for me, probably Voyager, because Janeway.
As a sitcom, interesting. But
I-
Janeway is excellent.
Yeah, look, it's probably the closest thing to sitcoms that I watch. I'm going to call it. 'Cause I can't say Friends, can I? Be awful.
You could, but nobody has yet.
No. We've had votes for Seinfeld, and it's been quite controversial.
Oh,
Oh, you're another anti-Seinfelder. Okay.
No one is likable in that show. Can't.
Yeah. So this week I was browsing the tech news pages and I hit upon a tale of woe of someone having their online streaming service account passwords compromised. And I thought, who is this person? And why did they not know about these things? Then I looked at the byline and I thought, Adam Turner. I've heard that name somewhere before. Hey Adam, have you heard of this Adam Turner chap?
I have, and he decided to name and shame himself. He even said in the story, I am a tech journalist and I spend my days telling people not to share passwords. I shared a password and paid the price because I figured that my tale of woe might actually help some other people. Like even people who should know better make this mistake. It's my educated guess as to what happened. So the story is about a month ago, a little bit more. I noticed that on my Stan account, an extra user profile turned up because it's always been just Adam, and then next to Adam appeared Eve. Ha ha! Insert joke here, right? So I thought, all right, that's a bit weird. Now, to be brutally honest, I'm one of those people who has shared passwords, access to their account. We've talked about this before. It's the brother-in-law syndrome. You don't need to have a subscription to everything. You just need a brother-in-law with a subscription to everything. Now, really, it's actually it's an elderly relative, so it's not even a brother-in-law. And in lockdown, I don't feel too bad about that. Sue me. So my first thought is, all right, well, they've got bored and they've started mucking around with the user settings and created themselves a user profile and think it's very funny to put Eve next to Adam. So I rang him up and had a chat, and no, it wasn't them. I thought, well, that's not good. So I went into Stan's, looked at the user profile, and it had been watching shows that we've never watched. And then I went into Stan's history of the devices that were accessing the account. And there was a Sony Bravia smart TV in Sydney accessing the account. I thought, hang on, my hospitality doesn't extend that far. It stops at the Murray. Thank you very much.
I've noticed this many times, many times.
Yes. So I thought, right, that's not on. So I, like most services, Stan has a button that lets you click that says boot out all the devices and make every device log back in again. And I did it quickly because I thought this person has my password, so they could actually boot me out first if they get first mover advantage. So I booted out all the devices, changed the password, and then logged my devices back in and gave the password to the one relative who was using the account. And Eve has not reappeared. So they were halfway through watching the series Miracle Worker Dark Ages, and I haven't watched any more episodes. So I'm sorry, but if you're listening, you're going to have to go and get your fix elsewhere. So, of course, at this point, I'm thinking, well, I'm pretty careful when it comes to security things. How did this person get into my account? So I went and had a look through my password manager and my long list of passwords and went, okay, I've used that password once before. And to be perfectly honest, the password manager that I use has been warning me. It pops up a thing every now and then and says, you need to do a password check because you've reused a few passwords. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So
what you're saying, Adam, is that I should actually grab the newspaper that this article was in, roll it up, and beat you over the head with it a few times.
Pretty much, yeah. So what I figured out is that many moons ago, I used the same email address and the same password to sign up for a DNS workaround service that you used to sneak into Netflix from another country. So by default, if you watch Netflix in Australia, it knows you're in Australia. This could make it think I was in America so I could watch American Netflix. I don't really bother anymore because most of what you want to watch on Netflix is here anyway. And normally when I sign up for new services, I create an email alias that I only use for that service or for one or two services, and I don't share with anybody else, which
And the
makes it
reason you
harder to
and
break into my
for
accounts.
those catching up, Adam, why do you do that? Why do you want a new email address
It's
for
funny you
every
should
service?
ask. Because then, well, put it this way, you might have looked around and found some of my public email addresses, and you can go over to Amazon and iTunes and Netflix and try and break into my account all day. Those accounts don't exist because I
Adam is
use
not
one-off.
strictly speaking advising you to do this, people, by the way.
Yeah,
He doesn't want you
to try and break. But what I'm saying is, I use email addresses that nobody knows and that I don't use for anything else. So that makes me harder to find and harder to break into. And I think while it's a little bit of a hassle, the email service that I use makes it fairly easy to create aliases. And because if you're using a password manager to keep track of it all anyway, it's not a big deal. And it definitely helps. But again, I'd made the mistake of using the same password and the same login for this other service. So my educated guess is that somewhere along the line, this DNS workaround service got hacked and somebody stole their long list of usernames and passwords. Now, I did a check on Have I Been Pawned, and it's not listed there as a service that's been hacked. But that's my educated guess. So that got hacked, and then the hackers either sold that list on the dark web or dumped it somewhere on the web where other people could grab it. And then someone else has come along and grabbed this list and thought, oh, this is a really useful list. I'm going to go and see if these login and passwords work on all these other services. It's called credential stuffing. And because it was a DNS workaround service, you can assume, all right, this person's probably got a Netflix account. They've probably got a Stan account. They've probably got a HBO account. So they went through all the streaming services and hit the jackpot when they took my login and my password and put it into Stan. So how do they make money out of this? They go and set up a dodgy website where they sell cheap access to streaming services. And we know this happens because people got caught. And there was an Australian case recently where someone was convicted of doing this and selling a lot of logins and passwords for different services. So my guess is that Eve in Sydney went into lockdown, thought, I want to watch Stan. I can't be, bothered going and paying for a subscription like everybody else, or apparently even setting up a 30-day trial. So I'm going to go on this dodgy website and pay a couple of bucks and buy a login and password, and they got mine. Why Eve was dumb enough to create her own profile, I don't know, because if she hadn't have done that, I probably never even would have noticed she was there.
It's interesting. I had a similar experience a couple of years ago with Netflix, where my Netflix account got hijacked and I actually got completely locked out of it.
Ooh.
Which was a bit annoying.
Yeah.
But I contacted the good people at Netflix on the phone and they resolved it in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Which goes to tell you that this happens a lot.
Yeah.
Because they basically said, oh, that's fine, we can fix that. And they restored everything back to exactly how it was. And they suggested I change the username and password. So I used a different email address and password. But like you, I got caught out with password reuse. And yes, I have preached it many times to many people, don't reuse passwords and usernames, and I did that. When you look at your keychain list on an iPhone, it actually says you've got 43 reused passwords, for example, and I've been systematically working my way through changing all those accounts or deleting them because I've got user accounts for services that don't exist anymore because I've, like probably you guys. Well, 43, but there was an age of laziness where we didn't have to worry about this, 10 years ago. So there's a lot of those services which their passwords are reused, but the services don't actually exist at all anymore.
That's what tends to get me as well. It tends to be the old ones that are set up a long time ago.
Yep.
So there's an example actually that's hit the media just in this last week of old services coming back to bite people quite literally. There's a video service called VidMe, which was a YouTube / Reddit competitor kind of thing. They hosted videos that other media organizations put into their stories, and all was well and good for about 3 years while they lasted. And then they died, and the business sort of got folded up, and nobody really cared anymore until last week when the domain name got purchased by a porn site. And then, and I swear this is true, a whole bunch of really prominent publications, quite well-known large newspapers and websites, including several in Australia. I did cite a few of these myself in my travels, were suddenly had these older stories that probably didn't get much traffic, except that instead of, oh, here's our video of the latest piece of gameplay or this sporting achievement or whatever, it was in Instead, sultry Sandra sticking a banana where bananas shouldn't go, if you know what I mean. And that was all because of this reliance on, it's an old deprecated service. I don't think you can rely on anything. I think that's a lazy step in its own way as well. Which is not to say I'm, trying to cast the first stone. I now
Yeah,
have
look, I fully
good
agree.
password hygiene, but yeah, I have done the password reuse thing myself in the past.
Yeah. And I think for many of us that have been around on the internet for a long time, I mean, I started using online services in the late 90s. I've got user accounts that, go back that far, and to be able to work, I'm slowly
Hotmail,
working
cough,
my way
cough.
through all 900 or so passwords that I've got saved.
Yeah.
And it's a very time consuming exercise to go through them. And I try to, I literally sit there sometimes and go, I'm a little bit bored today, so I'm going to go and knock off another 20 of them. And I just kind of work my way through the list, and hopefully, perhaps one day when the internet's finished being expanded, I'll get there.
There are also real world examples of this as well, because this happened to me, would have been back in the 90s, probably, maybe early 2000s, where back in the day when you would go to the video store and you would take your video card and you would go and get your copy of The Matrix or Rochelle, and and then you go up to borrow it from the desk and they'd say, "What's your password?" And they would just expect you to say it in front of whoever was standing there, and you might whisper it a little bit. And I would say what my password was. And then one day it occurred to me that every time this guy said, "What's your password?" I was shouting out my banking password in the video shop because they were the same password. And that was the day that I started to think, you know what, that's going to catch up with you. And that was because I've done like probably 3 or 4 times over the years. It's like, no, I've got to go back and fix my passwords. But that was the first one. I was like, you are going to get done badly and you brought it on yourself.
It's really interesting as you're saying this, and I'm thinking about, credential stuffing and old passwords being traded out in the internet somewhere and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is where I got bit just a couple of weeks ago, where I received a letter from a bank that I had nothing ever to do with ever before. And I'll name them because they've been really great at this. It's a bank that's based in New South Wales called IMB Bank. They have one branch in Victoria that I've been made aware of. But someone created a bank account at that bank using my my full name, so first name, middle name, last name, my date of birth, my home address, but they also used my driver's license number to verify the identity. So I didn't know this until I phoned them, because I got the letter from the bank saying, congratulations, you have a new account. So I picked up the phone and said, hi, I don't have a new account because I didn't do this. And they said, oh, let us refer you straight to our fraud team almost instantly, which was fantastic. And they did. And they said, oh, this looked dodgy from the outset. We've actually already blocked the account, so nothing can happen with it, which was really great. So they picked it up almost immediately. And they said, well, the street address they gave is different to the postal address that they suggested, which is why we sent to both addresses. And I said, oh, what's the other address? And they actually told me what the other address was. And I looked it up, and it's a bike shop elsewhere in Melbourne. And I thought, well, that's a bit interesting. They also gave me the email address that had been used to register the account. So they gave me some good intel there. But then I said, how did they verify my identity? Because banks have to verify identities with 100-point checks and stuff. Yeah. And they said, oh, they provided 2 bits of information. They provided a passport number and a driver's license number. And I said, well, that's interesting. Could you tell me what data they actually provided? And they said, oh, well, the driver's license number they gave, and they correctly gave my Victorian driver's license number down to every single digit. And I said, what about the passport? And they said, oh, they used the same number, which was probably a flag that it wasn't quite right, because I know my passport number, having travelled overseas a lot, my passport number is something that's indelibly etched in my brain now.
And so, not your driver's license number. The odds of that are pretty low.
But I know my driver's license number as well off the top of my head.
Now.
I always have. It's a funny, because it's a particular sequence of numbers. It's easy for me to remember. So, and I said, oh, that's interesting. So they've done their part, which is to lock the account down, and they've sent me a letter officially advising me of that fraud and how it was perpetrated. So I've got a piece of mail from them, and that's important because I have to go to Vic Roads now to get a new driver's license issued with a new number, because obviously I don't want my real driver's license number being out there in the market. So I rang the police about this as well, Victorian Police, who very helpfully referred me to a service called ID Care, which
Mhm.
is I don't know if you guys have spoken about this before, but it's a public service that's out there. It's actually run by a bunch of large corporates or funded by a bunch of large corporates who are interested in making sure fraud doesn't happen. And it works in Australia and New Zealand. And I told them all the stuff that had happened. And I said, what do I do about this? And they very helpfully sent me a bunch of information, which was almost exactly a copy and paste off the Vic Roads website about what to do in this situation. But that was fine. But I went to Victoria Police as well, reported it to them, went to a police station, got an officer to sign a stat dec for me, telling me what the thing is. But the part of this that actually worries me the most is it's probably going to take at least a month for this process to run its course. And even at the end of that process, there's a likelihood that Vic Roads won't actually issue me with a new driver's license because they are very reticent to do this. They don't like issuing new driver's licenses to people. So I'm waiting now to hear back from them as to whether they'll issue a new driver's license. And if anyone from Vic Roads is out there listening, please answer my mail, because I had to send it via snail mail. I couldn't actually even go in and talk to them about it. So I had to put all this stuff on paper and put it into an envelope with a stamp and put it in a red box and all that old stuff. But I'm hopeful that it does get resolved. But it's actually quite disconcerting to know that piece of information has somehow ended up in the public domain or in a domain where bad guys can get it. And I still don't know how that happened.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If you've got any theories, because we haven't been anywhere in the last 18 months. We're Melburnians. We've only just been let out of the house in the last week.
The only thing I can really think of where that's happened is that Scouts Victoria last year was breached.
Yeah.
And a huge trove of personal information was stolen in that breach. And they reported it through all the appropriate channels where they've got to report it to the Privacy Commissioner, and it was reported in the press as well. And that was because I've got kids involved in the scouting movement. I had to, as an occasional parent helper, I had to provide some personal information so they could verify that, I am in fact who I say I am.
The whole working with children check kind of thing.
Yeah.
All of that stuff, but it's a bit more in depth. They actually wanted a really full identity check. So I'm pretty sure I actually gave them my driver's license number so that they could verify my identity and all that kind of stuff. But that was in the trove of data that was stolen. So my suspicion is that it's that data that's actually probably out there somewhere, which is why I want a new driver's license number.
That's a fairly in-depth tale of woe. The closest I think I've ever come to that was in the early 2000s. My bank called me up and said, "Oh, we're cancelling your credit card." And this wasn't a phishing attempt to, get my details or anything. They were cancelling my credit card. And it wasn't because I was broke either. It was because what they told me at the time was that in Finland, there had been a truck with magnetic data tapes of Visa transactions in it that had been hijacked. And my card, the number on my card, was on one of those tape reels. When
I'd
you
love
consider how much,
I'd love $1 for every time I got caught up in a Finnish hijacking.
Oh,
absolutely,
yeah.
it's just so common.
Yeah.
But if you think
Happened to me
about
last week.
how much data you could store in a truck full of backup tapes, that's a lot of data. That's a lot of information. Now, they changed everything. So they changed the account number. All of that got fixed up really quick because the banks are pretty much on top of this, as with your example with ING. But a lot of that data, a lot of that data is very old school as well. There's a lot of historical stuff that's out there that you just don't kind of think about, but could come back and bite you in a very big way. It's a good idea to really keep an eye on all of this stuff, I think.
Yeah. And look, I guess at the end of all of this, listening to Adam's story and what's happened to me, I think there are some key take-home things that people have got to do. And I think one of them is, be really careful about where you give out personal data. I'm now at the thing where I'm thinking, if someone asks me for my driver's license number or passport or something like that to identify me, as proof of identity, I actually want to know how they're going to dispose of that data as soon as they've finished the identification process. So I want to know that they're actually not storing bits of paper in filing cabinets that get sold at auctions or, on hard drives. I mean, oh gosh, I could tell you stories about a place I used to park my car and they kept my Amex number in a spreadsheet so that they could process the payments promptly for me. And I saw that spreadsheet more than once with a lot of credit card numbers on it for all their customers at the time. So, I'm probably going to be a bit more careful about asking questions about how my data is stored and retained and disposed of. But I think the other one is also, I think everyone should have their credit rating. No, they should be notified of their credit rating every month to make sure to look for changes. You know, we had a personal case of that. Last year at home where my wife's name was used to create to take out a mobile phone account that was defaulted on, and that killed her credit rating. And we didn't realise it until we actually went to our bank to do some other financing. So, actually monitoring your credit rating is a really good way to make sure that financial fraud's not happening or in progress. Because even when someone makes an inquiry for your finance, that appears on that report. So there's some basic things people can do.
Can I add to that? Those stupid little, mostly Facebook, what's your Star Wars name quizzes, apart from being really annoying because they're just inevitable, as soon as anything is saying, the name of the street you grew up in or the name of your first pet, those are
Third
your
grade
standard
teacher.
security questions. Don't answer them. Plus, frankly, nobody cares. Really, nobody cares.
No, there's a large group of people who do care, and they're called criminals.
Yes.
That's true. Yes, this is true. Sorry, nobody who matters cares.
Yeah, look, I every time I see one of those quizzes now, I write a message on it to whichever friend shared it and say, do not do these. This is how bad guys get your security questions.
Well, that static sound can only mean that the popcorn I put in the vertical hold microwave has indelibly burnt by now. I'd better go deal with that. But before I do, we should wrap up this week's show. Thanks to Anthony for joining us.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks very much for having me back again.
And Anthony, it's now time for you to face the classic vertical hold 3 questions of doom. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the big contentious question, which TV sitcom is the all-time greatest?
I'll answer the third question last because I have to think about it the most, I think. But in terms of where people can find me online, some will know that I've recently turned to the dark side and not currently really working as a journalist anymore. So they can find me at Media-Wize.com, which is media-wise with a Z because we're really cool and funky. So you can find me on Twitter on Anthony_Caruana. That's probably the best place. I do have a Facebook profile, but it doesn't have my real name on it, so don't go looking for me there.
Santos El Helper?
Something like that. And best sitcom of all time. That's a really tough question. I'm a bit old school. I used to like watching, things like Bewitched when I was a kid, and Lost in Space became kind of a sitcom in its own weirdness, in its own special way back in that time. So there's a few that, I'm a bit old school, I guess, on those kinds of shows. Addams Family was always a classic. So I go back to the old school.
I'm sure Adam has comments about his family, but if you do want to catch us online, you can do so at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for tuning in. Stay safe out there. Stay at home if you have to. Keep an eye on your passwords. Don't forget to tell your friends about the podcast and help us spread the good word. Leave a review on your podcasting platform of choice so we can reach new people in 2021.